Every company uses printers. For those reasons, today we're going to learn how to set up a network printer from beginning to an end. It's going to be very easy to understand. Even somebody who just started doing tech support can do it. Let me show you how. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Irvin, also known as Koboman. Today's video, I'm going to show you how to set up a network printer. And I'm going to do it step by step where it's going to be very easy to understand, even for somebody who has never ever done this. I'm going to show you how to set up the network settings from DHCP to DNS and then all the way to the print server so we can make sure that this network printer is set up correctly so it can be used on the network by the users within that company. So these are typical settings that you would see within a business that you might get hired to work as tech support. I will also talk about some troubleshooting things you can do after we configure everything and make sure that it's set up correctly. All right, so what you're looking at is some examples of printers, and in this case I'm just going to stick with HP. HP is very common, probably the most common type of printer that you would see in a business environment, but you can also have brands like Xerox, Lexmark, Ricoh, and etc. It's going to be very similar when it comes to the settings and everything else when it comes to configuration, meaning the network setup and all of that. It's going to be identically the same in the sense that when it comes to networking part, there's only one way to do it regardless of what brand printer is. So today we're just going to stick with HP because I already have it there and we're going to look it up. So this is what it looks like. This is a typical, probably an older HP printer. They might look a little bit different with the fancier screens and like this. But one of the first things we're going to do is obviously make sure that this printer is connected to the network with the network cable and making sure that the network connection is enabled, meaning that is patched in, that it has network connection to the DHCP server and the switch itself, right? So make sure there's data connection available there. And of course, power it on, make sure it comes on. And the next step is to actually get our configuration page, because we need this configuration page to find our MAC address, also known as physical address and sometimes called a hardware address. The reason we're going to need this is so that we can set up an IP address for this printer, so that way this printer can communicate over the network, over the internet protocol. This is why it's called IP address, internet protocol. So that way the way we're going to do it, we're going to assign an IP address to the MAC address of this printer, right? So it's an example that we're going to talk about here. So we're going to go to the printer itself and we're going to go to the settings. We're going to either look at the network settings or we're going to print the configuration page. So you can go to the printer itself like here, select OK, and then go through the menu, scroll down, find the configuration page, and then select the print it out. So once you print it out, it's going to come out right here, right? It's going to come out and then you're going to look at it. We're going to see what it looks like. So we got a bunch of examples of configuration pages. Sometimes you'll have multiple pages that come up, usually no more than two, and it would have all the stuff that you might be looking for. So again, we're looking for a hardware address. Let me just look for one where I can actually read it. A bunch of these images are blurry, so I apologize for that. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. Here's a configuration page. And this looks to be a printer that has wireless capability. Since we're going to physically plug it in, but it's going to be the same for wireless. But in this case, it's going to be wired, right? It's going to be physically connected to the network. We're going to look for hardware address, and it's right there where it says 802.3 wired, and it says here hardware address, also known as MAC address, and here it is. So we're going to make note of that. But if you're going to set this up on a wireless network, here it is. Here's the wireless settings, hardware address for the MAC. All right, so let's take note of this MAC address. I'm just going to type it here. It says 9C. By the way, you don't need the colons that are in between, so you just need to type it as it is without the colons, right? So we're going to do that. So it's B6 54 4D 30, and I think that's EC 544D 30. EC. Typed in ED. All right, so we got our MAC address. Now what's next? What's the next step? Well, depends. Do you want to use a static IP address that's set up on the printer itself? Meaning that you went inside of the settings. For example, if you go to let's say you manually go inside of the menu. So imagine that this is the menu here, right? If you look over here, you go into the menu and then you find something that looks like network settings, right? Network setup. You go in and you type in a manual IP address, meaning you're setting up a manually set up static IP address and you want to use that IP address for the printer. So that's one option. You can put it in and then say this is the IP address, and after that all we have to make sure is that the DHCP server is allowing that static IP address to connect. That means that it's within the range of the DHCP server scope. So that would work fine. But then again, you would have to also make sure that the DNS is set up correctly. So you can do it like that, which is fine. But you can also set it up just to be automatically detected and automatically assigned an IP address, which is done through the DHCP server, right? Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol will give a printer or any other device, as soon as it connects to the network, it will give it a next available IP address because it's dynamic, right? But that's not what we want. We don't want that IP address to change. We don't want it to be dynamic. We either want it to be static, like I've mentioned already. That means you go into the printer and you set it up as a static IP address, or we can reserve an IP address for this printer, which will stay the same no matter what, as long as you don't go inside a DHCP server and delete it at some point, right? But we're going to create an IP address reservation for this printer. So we're reserving that IP address for that printer on the DHCP server so it remains the same. I apologize if I'm repeating myself. I just feel like it's very important to understand the difference. And this video is specifically designed for beginners. So for that reason, once you're inside of the settings, network setup settings for your printer, whether it's HP, Xerox, Ricoh, whatever, make sure it's set to automatically assign IP address. For example, if you look at the web interface here to the right, you can get inside the web interface as long as you know what the IP address is of the connected device. In this case, printer is connected to the network. If you know what the current IP address is, all you have to do is just type it in up here, just like in your web browser, and should be able to access the web interface. You can see here that it has an option for a manual IP. I'm going to zoom into this as best as I can. The picture is not the best, but you can see that somebody has started to type in a manual IP address. This is that static IP address, and then this is what they want. This is fine. That's their first option. We're not going to do that. We're going to set to automatic IP address because we're going to create that reservation. All right, now that we have our MAC address, we're going to go into the DHCP server. We're going to add a reservation for it. All right, so we're going to go to our admin tools. We're going to go to DHCP server. We're going to make this a little bit bigger here so we can see better, right? Here is our domain controller. All right, we're going to expand this. We're going to select IP version 4. So we're going to select our scope, meaning scope is basically the IP range that's set up for your network. You can have multiple scopes, but in the nutshell, what that means is how many IP addresses are allowed to be controlled or basically be within this scope. It's just a way to organize the network. That's what that is really. But in this case, our IP range is between 10.0.0.100 all the way up to 10.0.0.200. And if you create a new scope within here, so if you right click IP version 4 and select to create a new scope, and if you go to the wizard, you can specify what kind of scope would you like, and you can specify the numbers, the naming scheme, whatever it is that you need to do. But what you just need to know right now is these are the IP addresses that are available for us to use. So we're going to have to pick one that we're going to create a reservation for this printer. So right now, let's just look at the things that are connected right now to the DHCP server. Now this is a fresh install and it's a virtual machine setup. So right now we just have one thing that's connected right now, and it's a client computer, and it's a Windows 11 client computer. The reason I know is because that's the only thing that I have running in the background when it comes to the virtual machines. But this is what is connected, and it's using this IP address. It's using the next available IP address, which is 10.0.0.111. All right. How do I know? Well, here is our virtual machine. So this is our Windows 11 machine. So I'm just going to open up a command line, and I'm going to type in ipconfig/all. And here is our IP address, 10.0.0.111. So that's what's being used by this computer currently, right? So that's what's available. How else can you know? You can also look at the identifier. So if, let's say you've connected the printer already, let's say you've connected to the printer already, it would get an automatically assigned IP address, which in this case would most likely be 112. And it would show up as this, but it would have a host name that's reflected within the printer itself. So the printer itself will have a printer name inside, but it will be reflected in here. It would say blah, 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 and it would say the computer name or the printer name in here. But it would also have another very important identifier, and guessed it, you've guessed it right, it's the hardware identifier. So if I scroll to the right, you can see what the unique identifier is for this Windows 11 computer. And look, that's the MAC address, right? That's the MAC address. Is it this here? No, it's not, because our MAC address is completely different. But if you have connected the printer ahead of time, and it's already connected to the network, so let's pretend this here is here, you can simply right-click this here and select Add Reservation. This would reserve this IP address for this printer only, and no other computer will be able to get that IP address. But since we didn't do that, and that's okay, we're going to create a reservation IP address ahead of time for this printer, so that way when the printer does connect to the network, it's going to give it that IP address that we tell it to, that we want to use. All right, so all I did was just click on reservations down here. Since we don't have any right now, I'm just going to right click the folder here. I'm going to select new reservation, right? And we're going to name it something that we're going to use as the host name for this printer as well. So what is a host name? It's the computer name. Like for example, the computer I'm using right now is called DC1. And here's just an example of it right now. I did ipconfig / previously. You can see the host name is DC1, also known as computer name. So if I also go to the system itself, you can see the name of this device is DC1, right? So why is this important? Well, we want to know how to identify this printer or any other computer on the network based off of their host name. Now, this is not where you are telling it to use a specific host name, but we're just going to use the same host name that we're going to use in our DNS setup here, so that way we are organized. So we're going to ahead of time, we're going to come up with the printer name that we're going to use for the network to identify. So we're just going to call it, and you can call it whatever is the naming scheme is within your business. So we're just going to call it printer 1 at HR. So we're going to pretend that it's printer 1 at HR, ATHR. So we're going to use that host name later on our DNS setup. Anyways, don't worry about this too much. I'll explain it further. Let's concentrate on our IP address here. So we're going to use next available IP address, but you can use whatever. If you decide to use 199, that's fine too. But we're going to use .0.0.112. We're going to use that. And then we're going to, guess what? We're going to use our MAC address. So that way we can tell the DHCP server, assign this IP address to this MAC address, to this physical address of this device only. Do not allow any other devices that connect to the network to use this IP address. Only this MAC address. And we're going to type in a description here. We're going to say HP printer located in HR. Located. Did I spell that located? located in HR. And it says support type here, just leave it at both. The main one we need here is DHCP, which is fine. We're done here. We're just going to select add, and now when our printer, when it connects with this specific IP address, it's going to get, with this specific MAC address, physical address, it's going to get this specific IP address. I'm going to click add, and there it is. Now, if we select on address leases, we can see both show up. However, since it's not connected, our printer is not connected yet, it says inactive. Once our printer is connected, it's going to say active. And if we scroll over, you can see our unique identifier right here. And it's a good thing that we added a description here as well, so later on when you have hundreds of things that are connected here, you can find your way around it. I apologize if I repeat myself sometimes. It's just this video is specifically designed for entry-level people, and it's good to repeat sometimes. This is how we learn things. All right, so we got our IP address for our printer, right? So we're going to do this here. We're going to make sure that we keep track of what we're doing, and we're going to type in the IP address here. This is just for our notes, because we do still have to go to the DNS. And later on, you also might need to do some troubleshooting. So it's good to have this handy and to keep track of it. So this MAC address is going to use this IP address. All right, we are done with DHCP. We're going to minimize all of this. We're going to go open up DNS. We're going to go to our admin tools. We're going to open up a DNS, domain name system. So why do we need to go to DNS? Well, we need to tell the network which host name, which printer name we're going to use to identify it on the network, right? And then we're going to say to DNS, we're going to tell the DNS, hey, this name is actually located at this IP address. So that way we don't have to remember what the IP address is in the future. That's the point of DNS. DNS will take our host name, because host name or computer name or printer name, it's easier to remember than the IP address, because you can have thousands of IP addresses out there. It's easier to remember that. So that way we can add it to computer machines, our users' machines, and this and that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory right there. All right, we're going to go to forward lookup zones because we're forwarding our name to the IP address. That's the whole point of it. We're going to select forward zones. So here's our domain controller. We're going to select forward lookup zones. We're going to expand that like we did so here, and make sure that you're selecting the correct domain that you're going to use this on. If you don't know what that is, if let's say you just started working at some company, then you can ask somebody, what is our domain name, right? And you can also look it up if you look at the system here or through the IP config and all of that. You can see that the domain name here is, well, here's the computer name, and the domain name, well, it used to be here. Advanced system settings, computer name, here it is. DC1 on corp.contoso. This screen used to have this information. I don't know why they removed it, or maybe I'm simply blind to it. Anyways, they keep changing the way things look. Doesn't matter. So here is an example. Remember that client 2 that we saw up here? Here it is, client2.corp.contoso, right? We're going to have something else similar show up here once we enter our DNS entry. After this, we're going to have the same thing, corp.contoso once we set up DNS, because it's all connected. But you can see that it's a .111, and you can see that it's called client 2, and you can see that there is a DNS entry for it right here. Now, a lot of these entries, or all of these other entries, are created automatically in DNS. Why? Is because when you join a regular Windows computer to domain, it will automatically create a DNS entry for it. And how does it know to create the client 2? Well, that's because that's the name of this Windows 11 machine. You can see here it is. It's called client 2. and that's the name of this computer, right? Just like we look at the DC1, if I go to system here, you can see that this one is called client 2. So it automatically created this entry for this. That's not the case necessarily with the printers. We're going to have to do it manually. And you can see that this entry, this DNS entry, is pointing to an IP address. So this is what we have to do. So we're going to right click our domain. We're going to select new host A, just like it is over here with these other ones. New host A, that means at. And then we're going to use that same name that we used before. And again, we've done this here just for the sake of tracking, but we're going to use it same as for the host name. So for the DNS. So it's going to be called printer1 at HR. So we're going to name it printer1 at HR. You can see how this is automatically populating here automatically, just like it's showing here in DHCP for this client 2. So you can see how we're manually doing this for the printer, right? You can see how we're manually doing this for printer. Once we update this, this was going to show up the same way. You'll see. All right. You see how it is now? It's populating that. And now we're going to tell it the IP address. And again, our IP address is just .112, right? So we're going to type that in. It's 10.0.0.0.112. And that's it. So once I click add, it's going to know where this printer needs to be, where this printer name needs to be forwarded to, which IP address. And it's the IP address that we used for its reservation. So we're going to click add. It says host record printer was successfully created. Okay, we're going to select done here. And you can see it, how it shows up right now. And it looks similar to these other ones, which is fine. It's just an entry, right? It's just a DNS entry. So we've done this right now. Now we know that this IP address is now using hostname printer1 at HR. All right, so let's break it down here. So we started from MAC address to creating an IP address and then to creating a host name. Now we can forget about all of this here. We no longer have to worry about it. The main thing right now for us is printer1 at HR. This is the main thing now for everything else that you do. The main thing. Whether it's troubleshooting, whether it's trying to access it over the web, whether it's trying to add it to another computer as a printer, or whether it's creating it, adding it on the print server, this is the main thing, right? Of course, you can add it by the IP address too in the print server, but let's see what happens. All right, so the next thing is add it onto the print server. So we're going to go to Windows Admin Tools, and we're going to go to Print Management. Now, print servers, I should say, should be on a separate server normally, aside from the domain controller, because I mean, we got the domain controller here that controls DHCP and DNS. You can make all of these separate. I would maybe do a print server separately, just from everything else, but you don't necessarily have to, but you can. It doesn't matter. We need to go to the print server, whether it's here or there, it doesn't matter. Open up Print Management, and now we're going to add the printer inside of the print server, so that way later on it can be used as a network printer and added over the network to computers, to the local computers for the people that are using the printers. So here it is. Here is our domain controller. We're just going to make sure that this is expanded right here. We're going to select printers, right? Simple. So from here, we're just going to add a new printer. We're going to right click anywhere on the blank side here. We can right click on the icon itself and select add printer. Here is our wizard, printer installation wizard. So, and here it is, add an APP TCP IP. We know it's going to be TCP IP because that's the transmission control protocol over the internet protocol. So this is what we've added, and it says here by IP address or host name. So we're going to leave it at that. We're going to select next because we're going to use IP address or host name. I would prefer to use a host name because this is what we have it set up as. So we're going to type in our host name. Now you can use the IP address that we have here too. You can use the IP address, you can type it in, that's fine too. But we're going to use a printer name here. I'm going to copy that. We're going to select to make sure it's selected as a TCP IP device, right? Make sure it's selected as TCP IP device because it's transmission control protocol or the internet protocol. I wouldn't necessarily have it to auto detect, but it could work just fine. But I'm going to make sure it's selected as TCP IP because I like to have control over it. We're going to type in our host name and it's going to add the port name automatically. Now, if you add another printer with the same name, it's going to have like _1 like this. That means that you have a duplicate printer name out there. Okay? But if it automatically populates with just that means you're good. You can leave here auto detect the printer driver to use. Let's click next. It's going to try to look for it. It's not going to find it because it's not online, right? So obviously in our case, it couldn't find it because it's not a real printer that we are installing. So I'm just going to scroll through and pretend like it's there. And I'm going to find, let's see, an HP Hewlett-Packard single port. Sure. Yeah, unfortunately, I wish I had one of these printers. They're super expensive and I simply can't afford to buy a network printer that I'm not going to use to make a video, a free video and so we're going to have to work with what we have. So let's see what we can do. At this point, it's asking us for a driver to use, which is fine, which is normal. So I'm just going to leave it at this to see how far we can get. And this is normal, but pretty much normal what would you expect when it comes to installing. I'm going to finish the wizard. I'm going to look at some settings that we can look at. Here says Microsoft Software Printer Driver. This is what we've installed. So we're going to right click it. We're going to right click it and we're going to go to properties just to show you where you can make some changes. It's kind of the same thing, but here are things you can do here. You can print test page just to see if it's printing, and you can also go to advanced and tell it to use specific driver. So if you go to here, and this is going to be, it's going to look the same whether you install HP, Xerox, Ricoh, whatever the printer that you install, it's going to look the same. So you would find it in here and it's going to be named what we told it to be named, right? In this case, we couldn't do it because obviously I don't have it. But if you go to it, any of these printers, at this point, you can just basically make sure that it's using the correct printer. So if you go printer driver, you go to the advanced and you can change it. Because you can have, for HP, for example, you can have different versions of the drivers. They all going to show up here. And if you want to use a different version of it, you can certainly use it. For example, there are some generic ones, there are some different version ones, this and that. And that's great. Another thing to consider here is ports. You can see that right now it's using a port. What is this for? What this is used for is for local printing, right? And you can see that right now we're using that port for that name, right? So it's pointing to that printer that we've set up. It says printer 1 at HR, and that's fine. But if your printer stops working, let's say there's something wrong, and you want to route the printer and only local print, meaning like Microsoft Print, regular print that you use from your computer. And the reason I'm talking about that, because some software, for example, that's, I don't know, I work right now in a healthcare type of business, and they have specific software that they use to print patient information and stuff like that. Those print jobs have to be highly secured and they're done completely differently, and they have to be forwarded to the printers in a specific way, and that is completely separate from Windows Print. This is Windows Print. Something like that is completely separate and that has to be configured somewhere else. Anyways, not to confuse you here, if this printer is not working and you wanted to forward print jobs that normally go to printer 1 at HR, if you had a printer 2 at HR and that is working, all you have to do is just go to ports here and select printer 2 at HR. So you would find printer 2 in here, right? You would look for it. Where's printer 2? Printer 2. Find it and then select it and say, okay, now I want you to forward those print jobs to that other printer. As a temporary solution, you can certainly do so. Right now, this is a port, right? Like so, this is a printing port. It's printing right now to that, right? So this is all related to the network and the way network handles print jobs, and it handles print jobs based off the printer name. All right, so we're gonna leave it at this. So normally, so now if you go to a client machine and you want to add this network printer, everything else is ready. You just go to printers and scanners, add a device, right? So this is just done through, this is just how Windows 11, similarly to Windows 10, you can select, and you will look for them, right? Then it will list all available printers that are available in your network, but you can have like 1,000 of them if it's a big company. But as soon as you get this pop-up that says the printer I want isn't listed, you can say add manually, right? So what kind of printer it is, right? Remember, we've done all this. We're going to select add a printer using an IP address or host name. So we can use either that IP address or host name, but we already have set up host name correctly through the DNS, so that's what we're going to use. We're going to select TCP IP. You can leave this to auto detect as well, but it doesn't matter. And so we're going to type in our printer name, right? And we can leave this query printer to automatically select the driver. We're going to select next. It's going to try to connect to it, and I hope it works. It may not work here, but this is how you would add this printer to be used to those people in HR, right? And once it finishes, it's either, so just like over there, it couldn't find it, and we're gonna try to trick it into adding this thing. And unfortunately, yeah, again, I know I said this already, I don't have the actual printer, but let's say this thing is not working again, you can go back to the print server and just look up that printer and say, hey, why isn't this working? That's okay, I'm going to forward the print jobs to another working printer, and all you have to do is just go to ports and tell it, okay, all these jobs that are being sent to printer 1 at HR, send them and forward them to this other, and you just select different port, meaning different printer, select OK, and then it's going to be doing that. Okay, so that's one way to troubleshoot this and to temporarily resolve issues. Let me just see if it actually did anything over here on the client side. It doesn't. Yeah, it's just use this generic. Sure, whatever. Let's just add it in there. Do not share. Finish. Okay, so it's added on here. You can see it. It's right there. And again, if it's not working, it'll say it's offline or online. Well, it says idle here. Sure, whatever. Okay, so what's another thing we can troubleshoot here? So now we're at the troubleshooting part of it. Now we know how to install and configure a network printer. That's all done unless you're using custom software, custom proprietary software that needs to be configured a specific way to route those print jobs to this Windows-based printer. Unless you have a specific software that needs to be configured and set up to route. For that, you would need some kind of a third-party print server that handles forwarding print jobs to this. And that's way more advanced, and I could certainly talk about this. But for example, just Google healthcare or something like that, and you would see what kind of software that they're using for their patient information. That type is very specific, and that needs to be configured in such way. But as somebody who's doing entry level, you don't have to worry about this. As far as you know, this is it. This is it for regular Windows print jobs. There's nothing else that you need to worry about. Now you know how to install this. And another troubleshooting thing, you can see there's a job queue. You will see what print jobs are being held up. So if there's a job that's being held up, just like on your Windows, you can open up print queue, and if there's something held up, you can go in here in the print server and just right click these and just delete them or whatever else, you know. So there's your troubleshooting part of it. Now what else can we talk about? Well, let's talk about Windows interface since I'm here already. Here's an example of web interface. So you can access this printer now by using that host name. So if I just go to my web browser and type in https colon // and that printer name, and I hit enter, I will be able to access that network interface. Obviously, it's not online, so I'm not able to do it now. But this is all you need. This is all you need to access the web interface, which looks just like this, for the HP, right? It looks just like this. So this is the web interface, and within this interface, you can do some settings control. Instead of doing it, this is remotely, you can do this. You don't have to go to the printer itself. And there are a lot of things in there, like for example, tray settings and this and that. But if DNS is broken, if what we did for DNS is broken, then you can type in the IP address if you really wanted to. So again, this is the point of DNS. You don't have to remember these IP addresses to figure this out, right? But if you wanted to, you can do that and hit enter, and it's going to go to that web interface for that printer. Whether it's HP or any other brand, it works the same way, right? Unless it's some crazy wild new printer company that decided to do it differently. All right. So once you go to the web interface, make sure you log in as admin. Otherwise, your changes won't work. But let me see if I can find anything that's in here that, man, I wish I had full access to it. I just can't afford. Oops, I didn't want that. Anyways, I can't afford to buy a new printer just to make this video. I apologize. All right, let's see here. Looking for some useful windows here. I don't know. Anyways, let me just, I'm going to zoom into this here. But if, for example, if you select like home here, you'll have tray settings. Like let's say there's some custom tray settings that you need to do for like labels or specific things that you need to do. You can go in there and customize these. And there's a lot of useful stuff here. I wish I could show you this stuff, but I just don't have access to it. All right. I hope you find this video educational. If you do, please let me know in the comments. Share this with your friends. Click the like button. I mean, this is free. I'm only teaching you stuff that I know. This is not something that is hard to learn, but once you learn it once and once you do it once, you can certainly do so as well. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If you need link to virtual or if you need link to the print server stuff, you can do all this if you just install a Windows server on your computer, right? If you install Windows Server on your computer, like if you have a Hyper-V or any type of virtual machine software, you can install all of this, DHCP, DNS, and print server, print management if you want. But once you go in there and you install your print server, make sure you add all of these roles. You see how this print server has in the DHCP, DNS, and it print services. Make sure you install print services. And if it's not installed, all you have to do is just go to dashboard and select add roles, and then select next, role-based server, and just select next, and then pick what you need. You can see how this server has DHCP and DNS installed. And what else did we need? Printed document services. Here it is. It's already selected. I had to install this so I can show you. And you select next, and you just wait for it to install, and there you go. That's how you can create your own lab. But if you do need a link to Microsoft Lab that is available, I can certainly give you that. Let me know in the comments below. All right, I hope you have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye. And check out some of my other videos. I have some really good stuff on AD and etc., etc., etc. Bye-bye. Oh, hey, I need to install Windows Update on this. Restart.